She stood at the altar holding my bouquet. She gave the toast that made my mother cry. She helped me pick the dress, planned the bachelorette weekend, and held my hand the morning of the wedding when I was too nervous to eat. And the entire time, she had already slept with my husband. I knew that. I had known it for months. And I asked her to do it anyway. That is not the story of a woman who was blindsided. That is the story of a woman who saw everything coming and made a choice that almost nobody in her position would make. And when you understand why she made it, everything you think you know about loyalty, about betrayal, about the kind of strength that does not announce itself is going to shift underneath you. Stay with me. Because this story does not go where you think it is going. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming stories here on Claudia's Untold Story. There is a photograph on a shelf in a hallway in a quiet house in the American South. It has been there for almost 20 years. The man who lives in that house walks past it every single morning on his way to the kitchen. He has thought about taking it down more times than he can count. He has never done it. In the photograph, two women are standing side by side on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. One of them is his wife. The other one is the woman he was sleeping with before he proposed. And the thing that will stay with you long after this story is over is not the affair itself. It is what his wife knew. And when she knew it, and what she chose to do with that knowledge for 17 years without ever saying a single word about it to the one person who deserved to know. This is the story of Ken, Lydia, and Vanessa. And before you decide you already know how it ends, I need you to stay with me because every assumption you are about to make is wrong. Ken grew up in a small city in Georgia, the kind of place where the summers are long and the expectations of men are simple and clearly stated. You work, you provide, you build something that lasts. His father had spent his entire adult life in construction, and Ken followed him into that same work, not because he lacked the imagination to do otherwise, but because he respected what it meant to put something real into the world with your hands. He was the first person in his family to own a house outright, not rent it, own it, and he had helped renovate it himself over the course of 2 years, working weekends and evenings until it looked the way he had imagined it would look when he first walked through the door. He was methodical. He was patient. He believed in the particular way that men of his background and generation believe things. That the character of a person was visible not in the big dramatic moments, but in the small decisions they made when nobody was watching. He was not a complicated man. He would tell you that himself. He did not want a complicated life. He wanted to work, to build, to be trusted, and eventually to build something at home the way he built things on job sites, steadily and with intention, until what he had made was solid enough to outlast him. By the time he was in his early 30s, he had the business, he had the house, and the only thing he was still looking for was the right person to build the rest of it with. He was not impatient about that. He had watched his father rush into things, and he had learned from that. He was the kind of man who waited until he was certain before he committed, and who committed fully once he was. The summer he met Lydia, he was 31 years old, and he was certain almost immediately, which surprised him, because certainty had never come that fast to him about anything. He met her at a cookout, hosted by a mutual friend in the summer of 2004. The kind of casual Saturday afternoon gathering that happens all over the South in the heat of July, where someone has set up a speaker in the backyard and the coolers are full and nobody is in a hurry to leave. Ken was not the kind of man who worked a room. He tended to find a spot and let the room come to him, which is its own kind of confidence when you think about it. He was standing near the edge of a conversation, half listening, when he noticed Lydia on the other side of the yard. She was talking to an older couple he did not recognize, and what caught his attention was not her appearance, though she was striking, but the way she was listening to them, fully, with the kind of attention that is rare enough in a crowded social setting to be immediately visible when you see it. She was not looking past them. She was not scanning the yard for someone more interesting. She was completely present in that conversation, and the older couple could feel it. And watching them respond to her attention was like watching flowers turn toward light. Ken stood across that backyard and watched her for a full 20 minutes before he introduced himself. And when he did, she looked at him in a way that told him she had already noticed him too, and had been waiting, without any particular urgency, to see what he would do with the opening. He called her 3 days later. They went out twice in the first week. By October, they were together in the way that feels plus permanent from the very beginning, even when you are still too careful to say so out loud. By the following spring, he had stopped thinking of his house as his alone, and had started, without consciously deciding to, making room in it for someone else. Before this story goes any further, you need to understand something about Lydia, and I want to be precise about this, because the temptation, once you know what she did, is to flatten her into a single dimension that the facts do not support. Lydia was not a cold person. She was not calculating in the way that word usually implies, where calculation is a substitute for feeling. She genuinely loved Ken. That part of the story is real and it matters, because none of what comes later makes sense if you strip the love out of it and replace it with something simpler. She was drawn to him for the same reasons everyone who knew him was drawn to him: his directness, his steadiness, the way he said what he meant without first calculating how it would land. She had grown up in a household where that quality was rare. Her parents had been composed people, managed people, people who understood that what you showed the world and what you felt privately were two separate categories that should rarely be allowed to intersect. She had absorbed that understanding the way children absorb the emotional logic of the households they grow up in, not as a lesson anyone taught her, but as the air she breathed for 18 years before she left for college. Lydia had a gift for managing situations before they became problems, not manipulating, managing. There is a real difference between those two things, and for a long time, in her relationship with Ken, she stayed firmly on the right side of it. She was loyal in the way that people are loyal when loyalty is not just a value they hold, but a practice they have maintained long enough that it has become identity. She did not give her trust quickly. She gave it carefully, and once she gave it, she did not take it back without serious cause. These are the things you need to hold in your mind as this story unfolds, because they are the context inside which everything Lydia did makes a kind of sense that is uncomfortable to acknowledge but impossible to deny. Her friendship with Vanessa went back to their sophomore year of college at a state university in North Carolina. They had been assigned adjacent seats in a sociology lecture and had been, from that point forward, more or less inseparable in the way that certain college friendships become inseparable. Not because the two people are identical, but because they fit together in a way that makes both of them more functional than they would be alone. The friendship had a dynamic that the people around them recognized clearly, even if Lydia and Vanessa themselves never named it out loud. Vanessa deferred to Lydia, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that looked like weakness or insecurity, but in the quiet, consistent way that people defer to someone they have decided is simply the better navigator in a shared life. When the two women agreed, Vanessa found her way to Lydia's position before the argument was fully resolved. When Lydia expressed a preference, Vanessa adjusted. It was subtle, it was consistent, and it was, as it turned out, the structural feature of their friendship that made the worst thing that ever happened inside it possible. Vanessa was the kind of person who made other people feel immediately and genuinely at ease. She was warm in the effortless way that some people are simply born with, the kind of warmth that does not require calculation or performance. She laughed easily and often. She remembered the details of other people's lives the way a person does when they are actually paying attention, rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. She had a gift for making whoever she was talking to feel as though they were the most interesting person in the room, which is rarer than it sounds, and more powerful than most people appreciate. She worked as an event coordinator for a firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, which suited her precisely because she was good at holding the needs and expectations of many different people in her head at the same time, and making each of them feel attended to. By every external measure, she was exactly the kind of woman you would want standing beside you on the most important day of your life. That assessment turned out to be both completely accurate and deeply incomplete. Vanessa met Ken through Lydia in the winter of 2004, a few months after Ken and Lydia began dating. The meeting happened the way these things happen, at a casual dinner, no particular ceremony to it, just the natural process of two important people in a woman's life becoming acquainted with each other. Vanessa liked Ken immediately. She found him straightforward in a way that she respected, honest in a register that felt slightly old-fashioned and entirely genuine. Ken liked Vanessa too. She was easy to talk to, easy to be around, the kind of person whose presence in a room makes things feel lighter without any visible effort on her part. There was nothing dangerous in any of that first meeting. There was nothing that anyone in that room, looking back, would have identified as the beginning of anything. And yet that dinner was February. And by April, Ken and Vanessa were talking regularly on their own, separate from Lydia, in the casual way that friends of couples sometimes do when they genuinely get along. Texts about nothing in particular. Phone calls that started as check-ins and drifted into their own conversations. The kind of contact that is perfectly ordinary between two people who enjoy each other's company, right up until the day it is not ordinary at all. Neither of them could identify, later, the precise moment when the dynamic between them shifted. That is the thing about these shifts. They almost never announce themselves. They happen in the accumulation of small decisions, each one of which seems, in isolation, defensible or even innocent, until the accumulation itself becomes a thing with its own weight and direction. Ken was in a serious relationship with a woman he genuinely intended to build a life with. Vanessa was his girlfriend's closest friend in the world. Both of those facts were true, and both of them were present in every interaction they had. And yet the relationship between Ken and Vanessa became physical in March of 2005. It lasted 4 months. It was not a single moment of impaired judgment at a party or a one-time mistake that could be explained away by circumstance. It was a sustained choice, made repeatedly, by two people who were fully aware of what they were doing and what it would cost the person they both claimed to love if she ever found out. Here is the part of the story that changes everything. The part that Ken did not know. The part that he would not know for 17 years, and that would, when he finally learned it, require him to rebuild his entire understanding of the marriage he thought he had been living inside. Vanessa told Lydia, not after the engagement, not after the wedding, not in some dramatic confrontation years down the line when the guilt had finally become too heavy. She told her during, while the relationship between Ken and Vanessa was still ongoing. Vanessa went to Lydia's apartment on a Thursday evening, sat down across from her best friend at the kitchen table, and told her everything, the whole of it, how it started, how long it had been happening, and what it was. She said, in the accounts that emerged much later, that she did it because she could not carry it anymore, because the weight of what she was doing was incompatible with the person she understood herself to be, because Lydia was her closest friend in the world, and she could not keep looking at her across a table every week while concealing something of that size. Those reasons are probably true. They may also be incomplete, because the thing Vanessa could not have fully anticipated was not Lydia's reaction to the information. It was what Lydia would decide to do with the information once she had it. And that decision is the axis around which this entire story turns. Lydia did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not pick up her phone and call Ken. She did not get up from the table. She did not ask Vanessa to leave. She did not do any of the things that a person is in her position would be expected and entitled to do. She sat across from her best friend. She listened to everything Vanessa said, and when Vanessa was finished, Lydia thanked her for being honest. She thanked her. And then, over the following weeks, through a series of quiet and entirely composed conversations, Lydia made it clear, without drama, without ultimatums, without ever raising her voice above its ordinary conversational register, that the friendship would continue, that she was not going to walk away from 20 years over this, but that the relationship with Ken needed to end, completely, without ambiguity, immediately. Vanessa ended it. Ken, who believed he was the one who had ended it when he made the decision to propose, never knew the difference. He proposed to Lydia. Lydia said yes, and then Lydia called Vanessa and asked her to be her maid of honor. Sit with that for a moment. Not just with the fact that she stayed in the friendship. People stay in complicated friendships for all kinds of reasons, and most of those reasons contain something genuine, even when they also contain something self-protective. What is genuinely hard to sit with is the specific decision Lydia made to place Vanessa not just inside the wedding, but at the very center of it. The maid of honor is not a ceremonial background role. She is the woman who plans the bachelorette weekend. She is the woman who sits with the bride while she chooses the dress and helps her decide between the things she cannot choose between on her own. She is the woman who holds the bouquet during the ceremony, who stands at the altar only a step away, who raises a glass in front of every person the couple has ever loved, and speaks out loud about what the friendship has meant. Lydia asked Vanessa to do all of that. She asked her to perform the most intimate and publicly visible act of female friendship in the entire vocabulary of an American wedding. And she asked her to do it while both of them were carrying a secret that Ken had no idea either of them was holding. He was the only person in the room on his wedding day who did not know the full truth of his own life. Why would a woman make that choice? There is no single clean answer, and I want to be honest with you about that rather than give you the satisfying but inaccurate version. One possibility is that Lydia was doing what she had always done, instinctively managing a situation, keeping the person who represented the greatest potential threat to her life exactly where she could see her, bound by a debt so visible and so publicly performed that speaking or leaving would carry consequences Vanessa would not be willing to accept. Another possibility is that Lydia genuinely did not want to lose the friendship, that she was making the harder choice of pulling Vanessa forward with her rather than cutting her off, because she had decided that the future she wanted was worth more than the grievance she had every right to carry. A third possibility, and this is the one that is the hardest to sit with, is that she was making a statement that Ken was never meant to understand, placing the evidence of his betrayal directly into the ceremony of their marriage, and watching him stand there and raise his glass at it without having any idea what he was looking at. All three of those possibilities may be true at the same time. That is the uncomfortable reality of what human beings are capable of when they are wounded and composed in equal measure. Lydia was both of those things, and she never, in 17 years, let the wound show. Vanessa said yes. She always said yes to Lydia. The engagement period proceeded the way engagements do in American families, preparing for a large and meaningful celebration. Dress fittings and venue visits and guest lists that grew longer than anyone intended. Dinners where Ken and Lydia and Vanessa sat at the same table and passed food and told stories and laughed at the things people laugh at when they are in their different ways, performing a version of normalcy for each other. Ken was warm toward Vanessa throughout all of this because he liked her, because she was his fiance's closest friend, and because the thing that had happened between them was, as far as he was concerned, finished and sealed in a compartment of his past that he had no intention of reopening. He watched her laugh across the dinner table and felt nothing more complicated than the ordinary warmth of a man who gets along well with his partner's best friend. He did not know that Vanessa had told Lydia everything. He did not know that every exchange between the three of them was passing through a filter of knowledge that he did not have access to. He was the only person at those dinner tables who did not know the full truth of what had happened, and he would remain in that position for a very long time. Ken's younger brother Ray was present throughout the engagement period in the way that brothers are present, not at the center of things, but reliably at the edge, showing up for the dinners, the gatherings, the ordinary occasions that mark the progression of a life. Ray was a quieter man than Ken, more observant, the kind of person who sat at the outer edge of conversations and noticed the things that people who were louder and more central to a room tended to miss. He liked Lydia. He thought she was right for Ken in a specific and important way, that she settled something in his brother that Ray had always wanted to see settled. But there was something that nagged at him in a way he could not precisely name. He would describe it years later as a texture in the room, whenever Ken and Vanessa were in it together, not something he could point to directly. More like the absence of something that should have been present. They were too careful with each other, not cold, not unfriendly, but managed, like two people who had reached a private agreement about exactly how much space to maintain, and were committed to honoring that agreement with a precision that did not belong in an ordinary social setting. Ray noticed. He filed it away. He said nothing to anyone. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lydia made a phone call to her sister that her sister would not fully understand until 17 years later. She called on a Tuesday morning and said, without building up to it, that she wanted her sister to know something, not to discuss it or to process it together, but simply to ensure that somewhere in the world, someone else was holding the same information she was holding, in case she ever changed her mind about what she was doing with it. What she said was brief. She said she was aware of something that had happened before the engagement. She said she had chosen to move forward. She said she did not want to talk about it further, but she needed someone else to carry the knowledge alongside her. Her sister agreed without asking questions because she could hear in Lydia's voice that questions were not welcome. She sat with what she had been told and she waited. She would keep waiting without being asked and without bringing it up for 17 years. The rehearsal dinner took place on a Friday evening at a private room in a restaurant downtown. 24 guests at long tables set with white linens and candles. The warm, contained noise of people who know each other well and are happy to be in the same room. By every account, it went well. Ken was relaxed in the way that men get relaxed when something they have been working toward is finally arriving. The food was good. The speeches were the right length. Ken's uncle told a story that overstayed its welcome slightly, but nobody minded. Sometime between 9 and 9:30, Ken stepped out of the private room and into the corridor outside. He needed a moment of quiet, the way people sometimes do when the accumulated warmth and noise of a room full of love becomes briefly too much to hold. He stood in the corridor alone for a few minutes. Then Vanessa followed him out. Ray had gone to the far end of that same corridor to return a phone call. He saw both of them come out of the room. He was too far away to hear anything that was said. What he saw was this. Vanessa reached out and took hold of Ken's forearm with both hands, not lightly, with a grip that had urgency in it, the kind of grip that belongs to a moment where something essential needs to be communicated, and there is very little time to do it. She held on for several seconds, then she let go. Ken walked back into the room first. Vanessa waited. And Ray counted the seconds without knowing he was doing it, 90 seconds. And then she followed, entering from the same door that Ken had used, entering the same room they had both just left, as two separate people who had simply been outside at the same time. Ray stood at the end of the corridor with his phone in his hand. He thought about what he had just watched. Then he put the phone in his pocket and walked back to the table. He said nothing to anyone that night. He would say nothing to anyone for 17 years. The wedding happened the following afternoon, and by every account that exists of that day, it was a beautiful one. The ceremony was in a church with tall windows and good afternoon light. The vows were traditional and plainly spoken, and Ken stood at the altar with the expression of a man who is exactly where he intended to be and means every word of what he is saying. The reception was warm and ran long in the way that receptions run long when nobody wants to be the first one to acknowledge that the evening is ending. The food was good, the dancing went late, and the room had the particular quality of happiness that only appears when the people in it genuinely like each other and are glad to be together. Vanessa gave a toast. It was the kind of toast that people would still mention when they talked about that wedding years later. She spoke about Lydia's loyalty, about her strength, about the specific way Lydia had of protecting the people she loved. Even, Vanessa said, when those people did not realize they needed protecting. The room laughed at the right moments. Lydia's mother pressed a hand to her chest. Ken raised his glass and smiled at Vanessa with the uncomplicated warmth of a man who is grateful for the people his wife has brought into his life. And Lydia, from her seat, watched Vanessa deliver every word of that toast without once looking away. Not with tears, not with the open, unguarded expression of a woman listening to her closest friend speak about her in front of everyone she loves. With a kind of settled, precise attention. The way you watch something you have made a permanent and irrevocable decision about. Something you have decided after full consideration to keep. Then she raised her glass with everyone else, and the photograph was taken. Two women, side by side, both smiling like they meant it. And 17 years of ordinary life began to accumulate on top of everything that nobody said out loud that night. 17 years is a long time. Long enough for the sharpest edges of a thing to soften themselves through repetition and routine, and the simple fact of days passing. Ken and Lydia built what they set out to build. Two children, a house that Ken worked on steadily over the years the way he worked on everything he owned, with patience and attention, adding and improving, until it looked the way a house looks when someone has genuinely loved it over time. Vacations that became traditions. The ordinary rhythms of a long marriage. The arguments about things that do not matter much, and the alignment on the things that do. The slow accumulation of shared history that becomes, eventually, its own kind of gravity that holds two people in orbit around each other, even when everything else in their lives is shifting. Ken worked. Lydia eventually moved into a management position at a non-profit organization in the city. The children grew into people of their own. The years passed in the way that years pass when you are not waiting for something to happen, but simply living the life you chose. Vanessa faded from the picture gradually. The visits became less frequent. The calls grew shorter and spaced further apart. Eventually, the contact between her and Lydia reduced to something that was barely distinguishable from silence. The occasional text on a birthday. The kind of contact that is more about the memory of a friendship than the reality of one. Ken noticed but did not press Lydia on it. He assumed that the friendship had simply run its natural course, the way long friendships sometimes do, not with any single dramatic rupture, but with a slow and unremarkable drift. He was quietly relieved. He had not thought about what had happened between himself and Vanessa in many years. He had placed it in the category of things he had chosen not to carry and had not revisited it. He told himself that chapter was closed. He would discover, eventually, that chapters do not close simply because you decide not to read them anymore. In the 17th year of Ken and Lydia's marriage, Lydia got sick. It was a serious diagnosis, the kind that reorganizes everything, that makes the future feel suddenly conditional in a way it did not feel the day before. She was in the hospital for several weeks. Her sister was with her frequently during that time, the way that sisters are present, during the things that matter most, quietly, and without needing to be asked. And one night, in a hospital room in the middle of what was a frightening and exhausting stretch of time, Lydia said something to her sister that her sister had been carrying the context for, without knowing it, for 17 years. She was not confessing. Lydia was not a person who confessed things, but she was tired in the deep and particular way that serious illness makes people tired, and she was scared in the way that people get scared when the future stops feeling guaranteed. And something in that combination loosened something in her. She looked at her sister and she said 3 words. She said, "I always knew." Her sister sat very still. She did not ask Lydia to say more, and Lydia did not offer more. But the sister understood exactly what those 3 words referred to because she had been carrying the fragment of information Lydia had handed her 17 years ago on a Tuesday morning 2 weeks before a wedding. She sat with what she had just heard for 2 days. Then she called Ken. She was not sure it was the right thing to do. She did it anyway because she had been sitting with it alone for 17 years, and that had begun to feel like too long. Ken was on a job site when the call came in. Did not recognize what was happening inside the conversation for the first 30 seconds or so, and then it landed, the way things land on people who have not been expecting them, all at once with a completeness that makes the world around them feel briefly unreliable. He sat in his truck in the parking lot of the job site after the call ended, and he did not move for a long time. He did not go back to work. He did not go to the hospital. He drove to Ray's house, which was 40 minutes in the opposite direction from everything he should have been doing, and he parked in the driveway and sat there for several more minutes before he got out. Ray made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table the way brothers sit when the conversation is the kind that neither of them has the words for, but both of them understand is necessary. Ken told Ray what his sister-in-law had said. Ray listened the way he had always listened, without interrupting, without filling the silence with anything that was not useful. And when Ken finished, Ray set his coffee cup down carefully and told Ken what he had seen in that corridor 17 years ago on the night of the rehearsal dinner. The grip on the forearm, the 90 seconds, the deliberate and careful separate returns to a room full of people who noticed nothing. He had never told anyone. He had convinced himself, in the years that followed, that he had made the right call. He was no longer sure of that, sitting across from his brother at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and he said so. Ken nodded. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he drove home around 2 in the morning and lay in the dark and turned over what he knew, arranging and rearranging it until the shape of it became clear enough to look at directly. He went back to the hospital the next morning. He sat down in the chair beside Lydia's bed. He took her hand. He did not say a word about the phone call from her sister, not one word. He talked about the kids and what she wanted for dinner when she got home, and they watched something on the television mounted in the corner of the room, and he stayed until visiting hours ended, because the question that was consuming him was not the one about what Lydia had known, though that question was there and was enormous. The question he could not set aside, the one that felt like it was sitting at the center of everything and blocking his view of everything else, was whether Vanessa had known that Lydia knew. Whether the entire architecture of the wedding, the toast, the bouquet, the altar, the photograph, had been built around a shared understanding that he was the only person excluded from. He needed to know if he had been the only one in the dark the entire time, and there was only one way to find that out. It took 3 weeks to reach Vanessa. He sent a message that was short and gave nothing away. He said he wanted to talk. He did not say about what. The silence that stretched across those 3 weeks had a particular quality to it. The quality of silence that belongs to someone who already knows what the conversation will be about and is deciding how to approach it. When Vanessa finally responded, her message was longer than his. She said she had been wondering when this moment would come. She asked if they could meet in person. He agreed. They chose a coffee shop in a neighborhood where neither of them was known. neutral ground, with enough background noise to make a private conversation possible without either of them having to drop their voice below a normal speaking register. Ken arrived first. He chose a table at the back. He ordered coffee that went cold without him touching it. When Vanessa walked in 17 years older than the last time he had been alone with her, she crossed the room toward him with the expression of someone who has rehearsed a conversation many times and is no longer confident that the rehearsal was sufficient. Ken placed his phone on the table between them, face up, the recording application already running. He told her it was recording. He said it as a statement of fact, not as a question and not as a negotiation. She looked at the phone. She looked at him. She said, okay. And then they sat together for 2 hours in a coffee shop, in a city they had both lived in for most of their adult lives. And she told him everything she knew. Vanessa confirmed the affair without hesitation and without attempting to reduce it to something smaller or more excusable than what it actually was. She said it was real. She said it had mattered to her in ways she had not allowed herself to fully acknowledge at the time. She said ending it, which she described differently than Ken remembered it, as something more mutual and more deliberate than a unilateral decision on his part, had cost her more than she had expected it to cost. She was honest in the way that people become honest when the alternative, continued concealment, has become more exhausting than the truth. Ken listened to all of it without interrupting, and when she was done, he asked her the question he had driven across the city to ask. He asked her, did she know before the wedding that Lydia knew? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said yes. And then she told him the piece of the story that nobody had ever told him. She told him that she had been the one who told Lydia, that she had gone to Lydia's apartment on a Thursday evening while the relationship with Ken was still happening, and sat across from her best friend and disclosed everything. She said she did it because she could not carry it, because the weight of what she was doing was incompatible with the person she had always understood herself to be, because she could not keep looking Lydia in the face every week while concealing something of that magnitude. Ken asked her, very quietly, what Lydia said when she heard it. Vanessa said, she thanked me. She thanked me for being honest. And then, over the weeks that followed, she made it clear that the friendship would survive, but that the relationship with Ken could not. So Vanessa ended it, and then Ken proposed to Lydia, and Lydia accepted. And then Lydia called Vanessa and asked her to be the maid of honor. Ken sat across from her for another 40 minutes after that. He did not say much. He was reassembling, in real time, the entire architecture of a life he had believed he understood, and discovering that it had been built on a foundation that had been poured without his knowledge or consent by two women who had made decisions about his life while he was standing in the next room, completely unaware. Before he left, he asked Vanessa one last question. He asked her if she was sorry. She said she was without hesitation. He asked her, sorry for the affair, or sorry, she told Lydia. She looked at him across the small table. The sounds of the coffee shop continued around them as though nothing was happening. She did not answer. He picked up his phone, stopped the recording, pushed his chair back, thanked her for meeting him, and walked out. Here is what Ken did not do next. He did not go home and confront Lydia. He did not play her the recording. He did not demand the accounting that any reasonable person would tell you he had every right to demand after 17 years of carrying a history that had been partially constructed without his knowledge. He did not call a lawyer. He did not call Ray. He did not sit at his kitchen table and compose the words that would finally say out loud everything that had been left unsaid since a Thursday evening in 2005 when two women sat across from each other and made decisions about his life that he was not present for. He drove back to the hospital. He walked into Lydia's room. She was awake, sitting up slightly, the television in the corner tuned to something neither of them would have chosen. He sat down in the chair beside her bed, and he took her hand. They talked about the kids. They talked about the garden she wanted to put in at the back of the house when she got home. He stayed until the end of visiting hours. He kissed her on the forehead before he left. And he made the choice that almost no one in his position makes, the choice that does not resolve cleanly or announce itself as wisdom, the choice that is almost impossible to explain to anyone who has not been in that specific room, at that specific age, with that specific weight sitting on them, and decided what it is actually worth. When people who knew him later asked him why, he thought about it in the careful way he thought about everything that mattered. And what he said was this. He said that she had built 17 years with him, that she had raised two children, and kept a family together, and done all of that. while holding something that most people, by any fair standard, would have used to burn everything down. He said he did not know what to call that exactly, whether it was strength or damage or love or some combination of all three that the English language does not have a precise enough word for. But he said it did not make those 17 years nothing. It did not make her nothing. And he was 60 years old, and he was not going to unmake the life he had built over a conversation that should have happened 20 years earlier but did not. And the responsibility for that silence was not entirely hers. Lydia recovered. They are still married. Ken has never told Lydia what Vanessa said in that coffee shop. He has thought about telling her. He has not done it. Vanessa and Lydia have not spoken in years. Ken does not know exactly when the friendship finally ended, or who made the first move toward ending it. He did not ask, and Lydia did not offer. Ray still thinks about the corridor sometimes. He told me it does not keep him awake anymore, but it surfaces. The way things surface when they have never been fully resolved. The way the truth of a thing, once you have seen it, does not entirely go away just because you choose not to look at it directly. The photograph is still on the shelf in the hallway. Ken walks past it every morning. He has thought more than once about taking it down. He has not taken it down. I asked him why the last time we spoke, and he looked at the photograph for a moment before he answered. He said because it is still true. We were married that day. Whatever else was in that room, whatever was known and not said and held by people, in ways I did not understand. The marriage was real. That part was exactly what it looked like, and I am not ready to put that in a box. I have turned this story over many times since Ken first agreed to talk, looking for the place where the moral is clean, and the verdict is simple, and the right answer announces itself clearly. I have not found it. What I have found instead is something more honest and more difficult than a verdict. I have found a story about what people actually do with the worst things they know, which is almost never what they say they would do when the worst things are still hypothetical. Vanessa told the truth to the wrong person at the wrong time for reasons she has probably never fully disentangled from each other. Lydia took information that most people would have converted into a weapon and converted it instead into a structure, one she then lived inside of for 2 decades without the walls ever visibly cracking. Ken ended something he knew was wrong, proposed to the woman he loved, and spent 17 years building a life he still, with everything he now knows, believes was real. And Ray stood at the end of a corridor for 30 seconds, watching something he did not know what to do with, and chose for 17 years not to do anything with it at all. None of them are heroes. None of them are villains. They are people who made the decisions they were capable of making with the character and the information and the fear and the love they had available to them in the moments that required a decision. And the family that exists today, the marriage, the children, the house, the photograph on the shelf in the hallway, is the sum of all of those decisions, including the ones that were never spoken out loud. The photograph is still there. Ken walks past it every morning. He has not taken it down. And I think, though I did not ask him this directly, that the reason he has not taken it down is the same reason he went back to the hospital instead of going home that night. After he sat in the parking lot of the job site and heard his whole life rearranged over a phone call. Not because he does not know what the photograph contains, but because he has decided, after thinking about it longer and more carefully than most people will ever think about anything, that what it contains is not the whole of what it is. I want to leave you with the question I cannot stop returning to, because I think it is actually at the center of everything you just heard. If the person who hurt you most is also the person who stayed, what does loyalty actually mean? Not the definition of the word, not the version of it that people perform at weddings in front of a room full of witnesses, but in practice. In a marriage that lasted 17 years and produced a family and a house and a photograph on a shelf in a hallway in the American South. What does it mean? Leave me your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reached you somewhere real, if it made you sit with something you have been avoiding, or think about someone you have been reconsidering, hit like before you go. It takes 1 second, and it helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. If you are not already part of our community here on Claudia's Untold Story, this is the moment to join us. Every story on this channel is told exactly like this one, fully, without shortcuts, without easy answers, and with the kind of honesty that real stories deserve. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you do not miss what is coming next. Because next week, we are going inside the story of a man who spent 11 years married to a woman whose name was not her real name. Her background, her family, her entire history constructed from scratch before they ever met. Real story, verified. Next week, right here on Claudia's Untold Story.